Let's discuss some safety issues that exist for students. Students often downplay the risks that exist in agencies. They're young, many of them, and have little experience, and so still tend to believe that they are invincible. And so oftentimes will underestimate the safety concerns at the agency. So it's important to talk to them specifically about the risks that do exist and that there are risks at every agency, regardless of the services that you're offering. There is an orientation checklist that does have some safety issues on it. That's part of the orientation and part of the paperwork that the student needs to complete in task stream along with you. For those checklists, you'll sit together with your student at a computer and review each item and provide the necessary policies to the student. Risk levels obviously vary between agencies, and sharing that with students is important. And letting the student know that you do take those safety risks seriously, and thus modeling appropriate behavior for the students. If there are any safety or health incidents, please, it's very important that you notify the field office immediately of any safety or health incidents. Some examples of those can be if a student is hit by a client with his or her hand or with some other kind of tool. And that there's an incident report that's filed at the agency and that's shared with the school. There are health incidents that sometimes happen. Students have been infected with certain viral and bacterial illnesses that have been shared with our students by a client. It's important that we are notified of that immediately so that we can ensure that the student receives the proper health intervention and has the proper paperwork and is ready to return to practicum and is healthy. It's also important to know your own workman's comp information so that you know if there are any health incidents or any problems where the student does need to have some kind of medical intervention or some kind of prescription to treat it. Are they entitled to workman's comp for that, or is that expense on their own? So something for you to consider. Also, we do not have insurance for our students for transportation of clients. We do have malpractice insurance for our students that's through the university. But if the students are transporting clients, you need to consult your own policies on that and be sure that the student is covered for if there's any incidents during that transport. We also inform the students that if they feel uncomfortable going to a certain place or taking a certain client on an outing or even getting into a vehicle with a coworker that they feel uncomfortable with, they have the right to stop that interaction. They have the right to say no to the opportunity for the meeting or the interaction with that client or whatever it may be. Students need to assess their own safety, and if they feel uncomfortable, need to be able to stop what's happening and make a personal decision for their own safety. So we do give them that information and that opportunity for them to feel empowered that they're in charge of their own safety and that the field instructors will be supportive of that. Agencies also need to inform students of the potential safety or health risks that exist. Again, they are going to underestimate those and miss some of those that exist, so it's important to discuss those. Also helping the student with de-escalation techniques, making sure to provide guidelines and policies that pertain to safety, educating students regarding universal precautions wherever that may exist, improving the safety environment, and making sure that the student is aware of harassment policies, which is part of the orientation checklist that exists. But making sure to talk with them about that. They have multiple layers, just like with workman's comp. Not only do they look at the MU policies, but they need to also look at the agency policies so they know their rights and the process on both sides. Using supervision wisely. So this is discussing the relationship between the student and the task instructor, or the student and the MSW field instructor. There are two kind of categories, some of those kind of initial supervision tasks that you have to be sure of, and then some that are continuous and that are ongoing throughout the semester. Initially, it's important to set the expectations. What kind of supervision are we going to have? What are the expectations and responsibilities of the student? What does the student expect from the field instructor? Is the student going to set a specific agenda and be responsible to discuss each of those items on the agenda? I tell the students that it's their meeting, and thus they should come informed and ready to have a discussion for an hour minimum with their field instructor, whatever that may be. That plan needs to be set early on, that there is that supervision meeting, that the student knows when and where that is. They can formulate their list of questions that they've kept with them throughout the week so as not to overwhelm you with those questions. And this is their opportunity to do that. So they should come with a plan. In the beginning, it's important to clarify boundaries and roles. It's important for you to establish from whom the student can accept referrals and can accept work. It's important for you to establish the hierarchy for the student, who is going to be available for them if you are not. Are they okay going to them? Do you want them to consult you before they talk with your boss about anything? What are those boundaries and roles, and the important ways that you're going to maintain those boundaries and roles, as this is a supervisory relationship. You are this student's supervisor. We want to steer away from dual relationships as much as possible and keep it as professional as possible. This is a power differential, whether we like to admit it or not. Students are very concerned that you have the power of influencing their grade and thus their graduation. And so it's important that you're aware that there is that power differential, and that you're giving that the respect that it deserves, and ensuring that there are no dual relationships with the students. It's also important to talk to the student about what they can and can't do in the agency, and that's kind of around the expectations. And again, making sure that the student is sticking to the things on his or her learning plan, instead of veering off in different directions based on exciting kinds of work that continue to present to the student. So being clear about who's in charge of their work and how they can receive those kind of directions. There is a need for more intensive supervision earlier in the practicum. That does tend to get better, especially for the second year practicum students, around midterm or a little bit after, once they're sort of jumping off that cliff and going into more independent work. When they're doing that and not having to check with you before and after each interaction they have with the client, and they're able to go interact with those clients without checking with you, your supervision time will start to decrease. As far as ongoing supervision that needs to exist, it's important to continue to discuss social work principles. So in every supervision meeting, you should be discussing ethics. You should be discussing diversity, social and economic justice issues, classroom integration you should be looking at. You should be looking at ongoing evaluation and providing that kind of constructive criticism as they need. Review the learning plan every week to make sure they are continuing on that right path, and that you guys have had a plan to enforce and establish all of the opportunities that you discussed at the beginning of the practicum, whether that's setting up visits to other agencies or shadow days, or going to certain meetings, or starting a new project, or whatever it is, making sure that you're staying on target with that plan. Supervision is a great time to begin to role play and to go through some possible scenarios for which the student might be exposed to for the first time, and help him or her gain some confidence before entering into that new situation. Making sure that the student discusses all their clients and all their projects and all their work with you in supervision. You're responsible for the work that they're doing. And so you need to know what that work is. So don't allow them to brush over it, and say, I've been working with this client for 3 months and she's cutting a lot less and I'm going to keep seeing them once a week. That doesn't really tell you what the interventions are and what the assessment is and how the client is really doing. And so it's important to get a real accurate picture of what the student is doing so that you can make sure to provide the right guidance and be aware at all times. And then assessing the supervisory relationship and making sure, again, that those boundaries and roles are being maintained and that you are each meeting the expectations that were set in the initial supervision stages. Some additional supervision tips. We all kind of get stuck in that role where we're a practitioner or we're a supervisor, and this being a practicum supervisor is a completely different role. You've now become a teacher. You are basically a volunteer adjunct teacher for us. And so really helping and mentoring that student's growth is so important. A mentor is what the student is looking for. Somebody to form that relationship with and really help them continue their growth. Whether they're a student that's a little bit behind in their skills and is a little slower learning, or whether that's someone who's been in the field for 10 years and is starting out at a much higher place. We all still need growth and we all still need teaching. And so it's very important that you see yourself not only as that practitioner of social work, but you're also a teacher now for them and allowing that student to have a chance to be a student. They're going to make mistakes. And so you can expect them to make mistakes. It's what you do with those moments, those teachable moments for those students to be able to help them accomplish that growth. And so expecting those mistakes, supporting them through those mistakes, and not considering them as an employee that for a mistake you're written up. This is something that they are to grow from and to learn from and not to be punished for or to receive some kind of administrative processing for. So it's really a time for growth. Obviously, there are some issues that will happen that are difficult and may not have an opportunity for growth because it's an egregious error. However, most of the time the students are not having those issues and they are simply making mistakes that you and I both remember that we made at one point and had to learn in practicum or in our own practice. And so please be patient with them and please help guide them and try to be the mentor that they really need. Recognizing that all students are learning at their own pace. Students aren't all going to be at the same place at midterm and all be at the same place 3/4 of the way through. Everybody learns at a different place and at a different pace and in a different way. However, most of the students will end up at the same place towards the end. And so if it takes them a little longer, that's okay. If they're a little quicker, that's okay. Adjust your pace to theirs and be able to guide them throughout. It's when you think that they are at too slow of a pace that they are not going to achieve competencies that you need to talk with the faculty liaison and decide what you want to do about that issue. Remembering that these, again, are student learners and non-employees. They should have adequate time for academic issues. They have assignments to do during field, which should be done during their field hours. They need time for reflection and time for additional supervision. So they can't take a full employee caseload or cover for somebody who's out on maternity leave or whatever. They're not an employee and need to be given adequate time to be a student learner. Making sure with the students to discuss concerns in the moment, just like you would with someone else that you're teaching, like a child that you're teaching. If you wait to provide that feedback 2 days later, it's not as meaningful as if you provide it in the moment. And so using your strengths perspective, but also being very clear and also being challenging, talk to your student about the issue that happened, what you notice. You can validate and normalize that they are new at this and that they're obviously nervous, that every student that comes through is nervous, that you yourself as a student was nervous, that they're just learning. And so you're here to only support them and help them to learn. But also giving them the feedback that let's talk about the situation that we just had, and let's talk about ways that we might have been able to respond a little bit differently to have a more positive outcome with the client. Or let's talk about the assessment that we just did, and if you feel like there's some components that you may have missed. And so really going over those things in the moment as they're happening. When a student is having an interaction for the first few times, and meeting with them before and meeting with them afterward to process through that. Waiting a whole week to process something that they were doing for the first time, and that was 7 days ago, is a long time to wait for these students, especially the ones that come in with very little experience. And so it's important that you're giving them feedback in the moment, helping the student to feel valued, that they are doing a great job, that they are a part of your agency and a part of the services being offered. But there's always room for growth, and helping them to establish and to work their way through that growth is very important. Some of you that are watching this are task supervisors, and some of you are MSW supervisors. Those with a task supervisor at their agency, and the agency has no MSW to supervise the student, we have arranged for the student to have some supervision through an MSW faculty member. Dr. Wilson Watt is going to provide both individual and group supervision for those students who have no access to an MSW at the agency in which they're placed. So that time does count towards their supervision. If it's in a group format, it's typically every other week, and I believe in the individual format, it's every other week as well. So you'll see on their journal that they will have some time that they add into there that is supervision with an outside entity. And so you can count those hours, and I just wanted you to be aware so you would know what that means. They will record that again in their journal. I would like to talk just a little bit about the MSW curriculum. This can be important both for the task supervisor and for the MSW field instructor. The MSW field instructor may need to revisit and look at some of the classes and the content of the classes, and that information should have been in the packet that was sent to you. The class names are here on the slide, but there is specific some information about what's covered in that class. So those of you that have graduated from MU will see that there are some differences in our curriculum. We did make some changes in the curriculum in fall of 2015, and so there are some differences. We have now required all of our students to take fundamentals of social work administration and to take DSM, whereas before they were split into their clinical and PPNA earlier, and they didn't both take that class. So that's one change that you will see. You'll also see that we have moved some things around between direct practice and what used to be called the community and orgs. And so we've just kind of restructured that a little bit between the new professional practice class the social work skills class, and the large group theory class. So we've just combined and moved a lot of that information into a more appropriate format according to feedback from students and from community members. We also added a seminar along with the social justice to go along with 7971, the first practicum. And so you'll see a little bit of difference in that as well. The students do have more electives now. Both the clinical and the PPNA have electives, and I have neglected to put the PPNA on there. So they have opportunities to take some additional classes. So it's important for you to talk with the student and say, what advanced clinical selective did you take? Tell me about the electives that you took. Tell me what you've learned in those classes. So then you can help them make the connections between what they learned in class and what they're doing in their practicum with you. The last area I would like to review before we get to the assignments are some common problem areas and some concerns about student performance, especially for new field instructors. There's always a little fear that something will go wrong, or the student will have some difficulties, or you will have some difficulties supervising. And so we do address this, even though the number of students is minimal each semester. Some common problem areas are inadequate performance, environmental issues, and situational issues. So inadequate performance, we typically see some professional or ethical issues, breaking confidentiality, arriving late all the time, or not showing up and not calling the field instructor, or dressing inappropriately. I've heard that one several times. Or just straight unsuccessful achievement of competence. So despite intervening multiple times, they're continuing to have some unsuccessful achievement of their competencies. Environmental is possibly there's just not a good match between the field instructor and the student, which does happen, although it doesn't happen that often. And the agency is not offering the opportunities that the student thought might have existed at the agency. However, if there is a good, solid learning plan, I don't expect that to happen, because this learning plan is an agreement between the field instructor and the student of the learning goals for the semester. And so if everyone knows of those and have reviewed them and have said that this is acceptable, then that should be the starting point, and should be revisited if people are saying that they don't feel the opportunity exists. There are some extenuating times that this is a real issue, and that is if an agency is beginning a new program and the student is excited and ready to go and took the placement because of that program, and then before practicum begins, the placement falls through. Or the field instructor might have a new job opportunity that he or she takes advantage of before practicum starts. All of those can be issues that cause some difficulty and some disruption. Or the student may have just unrealistic expectations of what the agency is going to offer, and we need to move that student to a new place. So it's important to talk about those issues early and as soon as they arise. And occasionally we do have some kind of personal crisis or an illness, or something that happens, a death in the family, etc., where the student needs to take a break, or the student needs to stop and take some time off. And so those issues do happen as well. We will support you through any of these issues and help you to understand how to proceed with those. Some ways that you can respond when there are some concerns are to identify and address them immediately. And so again, instead of giving them 10 chances and then finally in 3/4 of the way through the practicum saying, I haven't liked how you've done this the whole semester, identifying and addressing those early on, and recognizing that the student is or is not making adequate progress prior to getting 3/4 of the way through practicum. So you want to kind of start making those decisions a little bit earlier and addressing those earlier. Remembering that your client needs are always the priority. Your work is the priority, your clients are the priority. So if you have second thoughts or have concerns about your student meeting with your clients because you're afraid the student might do something harmful, or you're afraid that the student may break confidentiality again, or whatever the issue may be, if you have concerns that are significant enough, um, then you need to stop the student from any further work and remove them from what you consider to be potentially difficult or dangerous situations with clients or within your agency. That can be even just, ruining a relationship you have with an external agency or whatever it may be. Your work, again, and your clients and your projects are of utmost importance, and we respect that as number one. Providing support and a plan of corrective action. So if the student is having difficulty and you've talked to them sort of informally a time or two and you haven't seen any changes, then it's time to make it a more formal process while you're still offering support, but saying, I would like to get down on some paper kind of what we're having issues with and what I would like to see from you to move forward. And that can be a different plan or corrective action plan for whatever the issue is. There are examples in the manual of some corrective action plans. I've had to write some of those myself when I was a field instructor. The faculty liaison is there to help you write that, but it's basically what does the student and or the field instructor need to do to for the student to be able to progress forward and continue in the process. Is that that the student has been having difficulty in completing assessments, and so the student needs to shadow some more for assessments. The student needs to be monitored while completing assessments more frequently instead of having independence for that. Whatever it happens to be, those are the corrective actions. And then it needs to make sure to include what has to happen for the student to be able to progress. So in this situation, it would be that the identified issues need to not exist, 95% of the time, while they're being monitored in the assessment process before they can begin doing it independently again. And so making sure that you're including what the student needs to do to be able to then move forward to the next level. Also, making sure, again, we've talked about this several times, providing evaluation and feedback and discussing those deficits. Making sure to do that routinely. If you get to midterm and then you suddenly do their evaluation and show that they have ones in everything and that hasn't been discussed with the student, that's going to be some problems. And so it's important that you're having an ongoing evaluation with the student and discussing any deficits and being able to work then towards growth in those areas. When you are helping the student with that growth process, the student could disclose something to you about his or her personal life and or issues associated with their academic career here. So if you're talking to them about they've come into work late every day for the last 2 weeks, and then they begin to tell you why, that information is confidential. It should not be shared with other people. It should not be shared with outside agencies. It should not be shared with coworkers. It can be shared with the faculty liaison. It can be shared with your supervisor as you're seeking supervision for that issue. but it should not be something that's discussed outside of those professional relationships. You must maintain the boundaries and maintain confidentiality for that student. While at the same time, you're not the counselor for the student, and so maintaining those boundaries is important as well. And if they continue to talk about the issues that they're having, contacting the liaison, letting the liaison know that so that we can properly refer them to the campus agency or community agency if they're interested. Again, here's information about that action plan, a contract or an action plan that outlines how the student's going to address any issue or concern. And again, we're available to help with that, and the manual has suggestions for that. All problems and action plans must be documented and shared with the faculty liaison. That can be done through email. That can partially be done if it's at the right time, and an evaluation that's entered into task stream. So it just depends on the timing of that. You can also have a file that you keep on the student, and you share the information with the faculty liaison. But it's very important that the field instructor, the faculty liaison, and the student are all on the same page about about concerns, expectations, and corrective action that's needed.